live. Now we're live. Now we're opening.
Every day I search in spite of me. Every day I search for what I cannot see. Every day I search for you. Every day I search for the truth. Just can't help falling in love with you. More with everything you do. Speak and the mountains tremble with fear. And at the sound of your voice, I know you are near, be near to me. Every day I long deep inside of me. Every day I long for what's plain to see. Every day I long to be with you. Every day I long for the truth.
And we're back.
Hello and welcome to Church Online with the Ecclesian House. I'm Pastor Bill, and this is Pastor Nooms.
See?
Here, right?
Yes, right
Are
here.
you right here?
Yes.
Right here. He's right here. How's your week been, man?
It's been pretty good. I am not feeling up to par. I actually went to the doctor on Friday. Videoly went to the doctor on Friday. And I'm supposed to go into the office on Monday for some testing. But we'll leave that to another moment.
Okay.
So, to see what might be going on. I'm having a little bit of chest tightness and that kind of stuff. So, it could be pneumonia, or it could be... since one of my daughters has had pneumonia a couple times, I could have picked it up from her if she's got it at the moment. Or it could be something else. Which, one of them things. We don't know.
Okay.
We're hoping it's pneumonia. Which is a weird thing to say.
Yeah. Hoping for run-of-the-mill pneumonia.
Which is weird. I don't vape no more. So it's like the last thing on my mind now. Because it's like when I vape real heavy, you always worry about pneumonia when you get sick because you're inhaling water vapor. So, you don't do it when you're sick because it can cause pneumonia. And now I'm like, oh, I'm great. And then it's like, wait. Okay, I shouldn't feel this chest pain. So, we'll see.
Yeah.
How was your week?
So, busy. I struggled to find moments to work on the podcast because Lyft is so busy right now. It's pretty much back-to-back rides.
Wow.
Within I would drive 10 to 12 hours in a day. Like within 6 to 8 hours, I'm getting a full day's worth of earnings.
Nice.
And then I'm like, you know what? Peace out. I'm gonna go spend time with my family because, I'm a family guy, and that's more important to me than a few extra dollars. But so Lyft has picked up like crazy. Uber is still struggling. About 1% of the rides I'm getting right now are from Uber, and everything else is Lyft. Just almost back-to-back rides. Like I said, it's been busy out there. And people were wearing masks. People were being respectful. People were keeping their space. And then the governor announced that we were going to do a soft open on Friday, and pretty much all that went out the window. People stopped wearing masks.
Yep.
People stopped social distancing. People stopped giving you space in the store. It was like they got permission to be idiots, and so they were going to be.
Yeah, restaurants are open now with tables in between other tables, but the waiters and waitresses are wearing masks and gloves, paper menus that they throw away. Not that I've experienced this yet, but
Oh.
Olive Garden was good for lunch, though.
Yeah, so I've been watching the testing numbers for the state of Texas, you know, and there's a 5-day delay on testing. So if you go in for a test, the soonest they're going to know whether or not you test positive is 5 days. So if you go on and you look up COVID stats, you got to take whatever day you're looking at and subtract 5 days from it.
Yep.
Okay. So right now, Texas is no longer on a flat curve. As of the day that Governor Abbott announced that we were going to do a soft open, we started climbing again.
Yep.
And we're just yesterday, getting the results of the day he said that, and the curve we're climbing again. We're not flat anymore in Texas. Because he announced we were going to start opening again, and people went, oh, okay, it's all over. I can go out. I don't need to wear masks. I don't need to social distance. And all reason just went out the window. I'm still wearing a mask in my car. I'm wearing a mask in Walmart and QT. Everywhere I go, I'm wearing a mask. People are looking at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you do realize there's still a pandemic. It's still going on.
And that's that whole thing we talked about last week, I think it was that aspect of people using the wrong information. You know, people using. Sorry, I got disconnected from the Twitch chat. For some reason, 1 second. People using the information and going, oh yeah, they said it was great, and you're like, wait, what? No.
They didn't say it was great. They said if we keep social distancing, it will be reasonably safe to open certain businesses with restrictions.
Yep.
But that's not what people heard.
That's not what people heard. No.
Not at all.
No.
Yeah.
Now, I did like what Olive Garden was doing. They've got, like, every other table blocked off. And they've got, like, black tablecloths on those tables. And that's where they have, like, the wine for samples and the wine glasses and all that. And then, like, they bring you single-use everything. There's no salt and pepper on the table. There's no, so it's kind of interesting.
So it's like you're taking a picnic in an Olive Garden.
Yeah, it really is. With a guy with mask and gloves
So
bringing
your
you
wife
stuff.
finally got the Olive Garden she's been begging for, huh?
Yes, the wife got the Olive Garden she was begging for. We actually talked about it last night, and we was like, okay. I was like, okay, family meeting. You spun the meal thingy for like 3 minutes trying for it to land on Olive Garden. So you can go, we said Olive Garden.
It's fun to spin.
Uh-huh.
You made like 8 of them.
I did. I've got so many of them now. They're so great. But yes, we had Olive Garden for lunch, and it was good. It was good. But the weird thing was having being eaten in the house for so long now. You eat when you're hungry. You eat small portions, and then you move on throughout the whole day. How humans tend to eat.
Okay. I mean,
And-
you get over that if you live the lifestyle of being at home like I've been living for a while.
Probably.
Hi.
Take the Olive Garden.
Take you to Olive Garden. My wife just busted in to demand that she get to go to Olive Garden because your wife got to go to Olive Garden.
I mean, it's good. It's good food. So then, I lost my train of thought, though.
I know. Completely derailed everything.
Oh, so portions, like, I get the tour of Italy, right? Because it's
okay.
it's a little bit of goodness, of all the goodnesses, and I couldn't do it. I had my because I still, even though it's a little bit of everything, I still eat it separate because I'm like that. So I ate the fettuccine alfredo. I took 2 bites of the chicken, and then it was like, I'm full. And I'm looking down at the plate all sad, like, I'm sorry. I failed you.
That's funny. So my favorite Mexican food restaurant, it's called Casa Torres. It's here in Decatur.
Uh-huh. The one in the house, right?
Friday. I'm sorry?
The one in the house, right?
It was in a house when it started, yes.
Okay.
And then they made enough money that they ended up bulldozing the house and building a full-on restaurant right there on the property.
Okay.
And now you can park where the house was, but the house isn't there anymore. Now it's a full-blown restaurant. So on Friday, they released that they were not going to be opening at 50% like all the other restaurants in Decatur. They were just going to keep doing the curbside and to-go order for the rest of the month of May for the safety of their employees and the public. And I was like, that's great. They're exercising their rights as a business owner to run their business the way they feel is the best thing for their customers. They don't feel pressured to do something they don't feel safe with. And, that's great. So
yeah, there's
I'm
a couple
cool
of
with
big,
that.
I saw a couple of big organizations, churches and otherwise, being like, no, we're still going to be not in person till May. Sorry.
Right.
It's like, yeah, we're good.
Well, Roxanne works childcare for Gateway, and they're still closed.
Yep.
And presumably for all of the month of May. I don't think they're planning on getting back together till June. Sorry, I just realized I have the wrong
Chat client?
No, I have the chat client open, but I have the wrong podcast content open on my
Oh,
second screen.
well, that's
I've
not gonna
got
help you.
the podcast. No, I've got the podcast that's coming out tonight open instead of the podcast that we're discussing.
That would be a fun little hiccup.
That would be super confusing, wouldn't it? Okay. So, divine frustration,
Yep.
right? When God frustrates your plans. And it's interesting, when I was working I was working at this one ministry, and I was working next to a lady who was older than me and more adept at scripture than me, and, well, seemed like she was, And I mentioned all things working together for the good of those that love the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't mention it as Romans 8:28 says da 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 da. I just said it, off the cuff. And she said, "I don't believe that. That's not how the world works." And so I had to go and I had to show her. I had to find the scripture and I had to show her, Romans 8:28. But it's interesting that people will believe in rabbit's feet. They'll believe in Friday the 13th. They'll believe in, good luck, bad luck, horseshoes,
Karma.
conspiracy theories,
Karma.
karma. Well, karma's pretty legit. Reaping what you sow.
I know.
That's a biblical principle. But when it comes down to things working for the good, God being actively involved for your good, they have an issue.
Right.
They have a hard time believing that. And I think the main problem there is that, we have our definition of this is what's good for me. And then, will you stop throwing pins at your wife?
She's being distracting.
And you're being distracting.
Sorry.
Okay, so we have our own definition of what we think is good for our lives. And then God has this other definition, right, of what he thinks is good for our lives. And while our definition looks like this, see, my fingers are pointed like this certain way, and God's like, no, actually, this is what's good for your life. And we're like, but that's not the same thing, God. How can that be good if this is good? And it's merely the fact that we're children. We are just straight up children. We don't actually know, in the grand scheme of eternity, what's good for us.
Yeah.
We think we know what's good for today. It's
Go ahead.
It's like, I think going to the fridge and having that big piece of chocolate cake is going to be a good thing because I've been following my diet and I want that cake, and that's a good thing. And, that's my viewpoint on the world. And then your dietitian goes, well, if you have that chocolate cake right now, then you're going to undo all the work that you've done and probably set yourself up psychologically to fail in the long run. What's good for you is to not have that cake.
Yep.
So the dietitian says this, and you say this, and it's the same concept. We think we know what's good for ourselves, and we don't. We honestly, nobody really knows what's good for themselves. And so that's where we find ourselves.
Yeah, and it's always funny because you said something that is very true, but I'll take it a step further, which the thing that you said was, in the scope of eternity. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 minutes. It takes it a step further than just, we don't know what's happening to the neighbor. We don't know what's happening to the... And so sometimes it really does... You really got to stop and go... For an example, I, for a couple years now... couple years, that's funny. Have said I will not go home. I'm not moving home. For a couple years now, I've said things like, I refuse to actually serve at another ministry. I'll fund a ministry. I will do other things. That's it. Well, we moved to Tennessee in about a month. We're going at the end of the middle of this month to go look at houses to buy. And well, if you're on Twitch, you see what my name is. So, I mean, it did not work out the way it was planned. My plan. His plan worked out just fine. It's just a little slower than it should have been, probably. But
And that's your fault.
yes. And very interesting that you used, we both follow Craig Rochelle. The sermon from last week, because I'm a week behind because of, well, I didn't watch church last week. I didn't watch Life Church. And last week's sermon, I was just like, and then I turned your podcast on and I was like, yeah, those line up. He must be speaking to Tina. Anyway. But no, I exercised today, which I don't exercise every day. I don't exercise very often at all because of the arthritis. It's pain and I hate it. And, so I don't. And so I did today. And we got home, and I looked at my wife, speaking of what you were saying, and I straight up was like, don't I have ice cream in the fridge? And she goes, we do. I was like, I don't think I should have it, though, right? She's like, no, you shouldn't. I was like, okay.
That's awesome.
But.
That's hilarious, man.
Yeah.
So why don't we go ahead and read Romans 8:28? Do you have that somewhere easily pull upable, or should I pull out my Bible over here?
Of course I opened up stuff where the stream's not going to see that I'm just now opening. Yep, they're going to see it. Just now opening it.
I can pull out my Bible over here.
It's almost open.
We can read it in the Geneva Bible or the CSB. Those are the only Bibles I keep close to my desk. At this point, the KJV, I just can't even right now, and so.
8:28.
Yeah, Romans 8:28.
We know that all things work together for the good of those who loved God, who are called according to His purpose.
Right.
And it's actually that's one of those. It's pretty close to KJV. Actually, had a decent translation there. It's CSB and KJV lines up, because sometimes I'm like, that's not how I remember it, and then I look at the Hebrew and you're like, or the Greek, depending, and you're like, no, okay, that CSB is correct. And then other times you're like, oh, okay.
My only real issue with the KJV, I mean, you can talk about, the tweaking of this scripture, the tweaking of that scripture because of King James's, egotistical megalomania until you're blue in the face. But my real main issue with the KJV is that it's written in the epic poem style in a language that no one speaks anymore.
Yeah.
So when it was originally translated, it was the Queen's English or Middle English, not Old English, not Modern English, Middle English. Yeah. And it's had to go through at least 7 revisions just so that the current modern person can read it and actually get a gist of what the words are that are being used.
And a lot of people still can't.
And a lot of people still can't.
Especially under 40, under 30,
right.
Under 35, somewhere,
But as a work of art, it's a beautiful tapestry. And Genesis is intentionally translated at what we would call middle school reading level.
Yeah.
And it then progressively translates harder and harder and harder and harder until when you get to Revelations, that's what we would consider college age reading level. And that's a beautiful task to be able to do that. and then also make it an epic poem, and then also, you know what I mean? So as a piece of art, it is fantastic.
Yeah.
But as a study resource to actually understand the scriptures and internalize what they're saying, it fails. It's not good for that.
And
It's
and
not
that's the problem. And when it was one of the only, great. When it was one of several and it was the better of the translations, great. Now there are other translations that have been translated using more scrolls, more documents, more groups, more people. And so it's just, it's not that the KJV in and of itself, and I know you feel the same way because you've said so, is not like, oh my gosh, it's like the worst thing ever. Now, don't get me started on some. You know which ones. Don't get me started. I'm going to throw a fit. But, you know, it's one of those things where you have to use what is better. When you translate something and call it better and it's worse, you don't get points for that. You get negative points for that.
Right. Right.
Look at you, 90s
So-
Bible.
So did you see that TikTok video I sent you with that youth pastor telling the story of Joseph in Gen Z ease?
I did. It was rough.
I thought it was fantastic, and Gregory was like, "Oof, I can't even with this guy. Oof, that is not how you're supposed to do that."
Yeah, no, I couldn't. Now, I didn't say oof over and over again, because, you know, I'm 30-something. But,
Yeah, but Gregory's Gen Z, you know, so oof is right there in his wheelhouse.
oof.
But I thought it was neat that, you know, I had talked about Joseph on the podcast, and then that guy released the story of Joseph. And so, you know, Joseph is a really interesting story, and, you know, sometimes we gloss over the details, but, I mean, he was the favorite of his father, the baby boy, and he got this fancy multicolor coat, which we don't really think much about now, but back then, so expensive. Just to dye it one color would have been prohibitively expensive for most people. To dye it multicolor, or to outsource the materials to get it to be multicolor, was prohibitively expensive. This was a king's coat. This was not some, you know, ragtag thing. You know, here you go, this is whatever. And then, you know, his brothers throw him in a hole, and they're like, "You think you're better than us? You can spend some time in the hole." And Joseph's like, "I don't think I'm better than you. I had dreams, and I told you what they were. I don't know what your problem is." They sell him into slavery, right? And then, as a slave in Potiphar's house, he just wants to bring glory to God and becomes the head servant in all of the house.
Yep.
And then when Potiphar's off working, doing his duties, Potiphar's wife dismisses all the servants but Joseph, and then comes on to him. And when Joseph says no, or more specifically, Joseph says, "My master Potiphar has given me command and control over everything in his household except you. How can I do this evil thing to my master?"
I found it. Here it is. Sorry. Cat toy. Here it is. It went under my chair, and then here comes Mr. Amy behind it, the biggest of the cats, runs into my leg, and it's like, whoa.
All right. So, you know, he denies her. She grabs his cloak. He runs out of the house, flees the house, now naked, and runs away. And so she rips her clothing and cuts herself, and then accuses him of raping her.
Yep.
And he spends the next 10 to 12 years in an Egyptian prison.
Which does not really give you a good, like, when you read through it, just reading it, you don't get a good feel of that. Okay, guys, time. What is the time actually like? Stop and think about the timeline, because you get a glimpse here, you get a glimpse here, you get a glimpse here. No, there's some time, because people are like, well, how wouldn't his brothers notice him? Well, first off, Egyptians love makeup. They love that bat guano just everywhere, bat guano,
and it's been what, 15 years at this point?
Exactly,
since they've
15
seen
to
him,
20 years
or longer.
And I look at people. I walked up to someone the other day and said hello, and they went, "Huh?" And I went, and they were like, "Oh, you got fat." Because they knew me in like the 2 years period where I was skinny. Because I graduated high school at 250. I'm 260 now. So there was like this thin period of like 3-4 years where I weighed like 200 to 220, where I didn't look big. And it's like, you got fat. Oh, thanks. What's your name at Walmart, remember? She saw us and was like, you got fat. Yeah. You must be happy with your wife. I'm like,
And it also, you have to take into account, it's not just that it's been 15 years, but these Egyptian prisons were notoriously bad environments. So,
and still are. Historically,
the Egyptian prison, the clearance, like, you walk into a room and you're like, nowadays, and you're like, oh, I've got, 10-foot ceilings, whatever. So the average clearance in an Egyptian prison was between 4 and 5 feet.
Yeah.
So if you were taller than 4 feet, you had to hunch with your head pressed up against the ceiling to get around inside the prison. So for 15 years, he's hunching in the prison because he's not allowed outside of the prison. And so the amount of aging that his body would have done, he would have looked like he had put on a good 30 years during those 15 years.
Yep.
And then with the makeup and all this other, there's no way his brothers would have recognized him. There's no way.
And you're nowhere close to him. That's the other, like, when you go into a room with that level of power, you're not close to the person.
Right. Not at the beginning.
No.
Later in the story, when he's then brought them in for a meal, they're closer. But if you want to put it into a perspective that the modern evangelical Christian can understand, if you're sitting on the front row at your church and your pastor is up on the stage preaching, that's the closest they ever got to Joseph until he revealed who he was.
And the hugging.
Yeah. So, it just, there's no way they could have known. But what they intended for evil, and what, I think it's interesting that never in that story does the Bible ever say, and Satan decided, and Satan sent messengers, and no, Satan wasn't involved in this at all.
Yeah.
This was all human evil.
Yep.
There was no supernatural involvement from demons or Satan or anything like that accredited for any part of this story.
Yep.
This is all human greed, human lust, human envy. It's all the evils of humanity in this story from start to finish.
Yep.
And then he says, what you intended for evil, talking to his brothers, God intended for good.
Yep.
So, the whole world is going through this COVID-19 coronavirus thing. And you can say it's an attack of Satan. You can say it's man-made in a lab. You can, like a passenger I had this week, you can claim that it's both at the same time. Which I still don't quite grasp how you can fully believe it was manufactured in a lab and also believe that it's nature's way of culling the population. It's either natural or it's lab-made. I don't understand how it's both.
I could see it from a standpoint of the mutation that it's gone through.
I don't know.
Or crazy.
So there is all this bad going on, right? And God will do what God does. And he will take advantage of the situation to work for good. For the long-term good of all of us. right? So I've been seeing news articles. When this thing first hit, I thought, when they started shutting down churches, I thought, good. This will give the church, big C,
Right.
a chance to take a step back and go, okay, what programs and what things are we holding on to that are fluff and idolatry and undermining the gospel? And now I'm seeing articles coming out from people who, whatever you want to call it, they analyze the church, they do surveys, whatever. Now they're talking about advising pastors to take this time to hit reset on what they're doing and make sure that what their church is doing is actually in line with the Bible and in line with what we should be doing, which is one of the things that, as the Ecclesian House and as the Breed Manifesto, we've been talking about since we launched, was there are issues in the modern church that we've clung on to as the church that shouldn't be a part of the church. And we need to cut those out and stop doing them and focus back on the message. And, if during this time, the church takes the time to fix those issues, that's fantastic. That's a step in the direction of good, right? Now, do we think that God created the coronavirus as a judgment on whatever?
No.
So there was an imam that said that, a Muslim imam that said that it was a judgment on people who hadn't embraced Islam.
And there's a bunch of pastors.
He tested positive for coronavirus.
Yep.
There are pastors that have said that about this is a judgment on us allowing homosexuality, blah, 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 blah. The one pastor I know of that actively said that, he then tested positive for coronavirus within a week.
Yeah, God doesn't create things for evil. But well, I mean, in today's society, he does not. He created everything, which includes
the God that we are in the covenant of Christ with,
right,
is prevented by that covenant,
right,
from sending evil to the earth.
Right.
Before that covenant, we have lots of instances where it says, and God sent an evil da-da-da in order to da-da-da.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I was speaking strictly New Testament, after that covenant.
You gotta explain that because
it's true.
It's not just you and I having this conversation. There's lots of people that have access to the conversation.
Well, but, are they really that important?
Yes.
Oh, wait, that's why we're doing this. I forgot. Sorry.
Moving on. We should be having a private phone conversation.
Because y'all need Jesus.
Broadcasting this.
You notice that y'all also includes us? I'm just saying. Someone was like, are you saying you don't? I was like, no, y'all. Y'all means everybody.
Y'all means you all. That's everybody.
That's everybody.
That's everybody.
You don't understand.
Everybody in the world need Jesus.
Yeah, y'all is everybody.
Y'all are everybody. Everybody.
So, God doesn't currently send plagues and send evil. Evil can come from different but that don't mean he ain't got a sense of humor. like it's one of those where it's like, God did this. God didn't do. You need to sit down. Hey, look, now he's sitting down. It's not that God necessarily, but if that man happens to come into contact with a bunch of people who happen to have gotten sent to his house for no good reason, I don't know why they're there. Just saying.
Right. So I gave a big portion of this podcast to that clip from Pastor Craig talking about the book, Hope in the Darkness, and how the lady had ordered the book and then she died and the book was delayed. And if you haven't heard the clip, then people need to go back and listen to the podcast because it's a great clip. Yep. Pastor Craig is a great, he's a great as far as preachers go, he is a great preacher.
Mhm.
I prefer to listen to teachers
Mhm.
because preachers harp on the emotional a little too much for my liking. But Pastor Craig does a good job
Yeah.
of not harping on the emotional too much, but still preaching, you know?
And then bringing teaching in to make his points. He'll teach when he needs
Right.
to do the preaching. He's a very interesting speaker.
It's very interesting, and I really enjoy listening to it. Sometimes he says some things that challenge me, and then I have to go back to the scriptures and I have to go, okay, I don't agree with what he said, so let's find out what scripture says. And, you know,
And that happens.
there's been times where I've had to change what I've had to change, you know? I've been
And-
like,
and
okay,
that
he's
happens
right.
too.
The scripture supports what he's saying.
Yeah. You're like, I was wrong.
Yeah.
That used to be hard to say.
Okay. So then one thing I didn't talk about on the podcast, so we've talked about it in the past, and did you freeze or you okay? You did freeze.
You're
So-
frozen, yeah.
Am I frozen? Well, you were frozen for a second, but
Yeah, you're back now. It was funny
Okay.
because your mouth was, and then it was just words.
so one thing we've talked about in the past that I didn't talk about on the podcast that my wife takes issue with, but we're gonna bring it up anyway.
Okay.
9/11,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there are lots of stories about people who worked in the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001, who things like got stuck in traffic, so they
Mhm.
were late to work. They couldn't find their keys, so they were late to work. They, on and on and on. One person felt like they had forgotten something, so they went back in their home and then realized it was in their pocket, and it was just enough time.
Yep.
One person walked outside and then heard the phone ring on the inside, and they went back inside, and it was just enough time. On and on and on. And when we talk about, God frustrating our plans for the greater good, it's possible that those were flukes. But it's also possible that in the grander scheme of things, those specific people being alive longer were part of God's bigger plan for the greater good
Mm-hmm.
of everyone. And the issue she has there then is that why would God save some people and let other people die? And I think a lot of people have that same question. Why wouldn't God save everyone? And while you and I look at life through a lens of human life is precious and should be saved and maintained and da 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 da, God doesn't have the same lens. God has a lens of eternity,
Yeah.
and if someone's going to die and their physical life is going to end, that may not necessarily, what's the words? That may not be that may not necessitate the moving of God to prevent. Okay. So like missionaries who went to that tribe and got it off the plane and then got speared to death.
Jim Elliott and them.
Jim Elliott and his crew.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they felt like God was telling them to go minister to that tribe.
And they did.
And they stepped off the seaplane and died before they hit the sand.
Yep. And then
And then what?
what? It was a horrible tragedy, and that's all we know about it.
Mm.
Finish the story.
You finished the story.
I don't want to finish the story. Not my story. I didn't start it.
Not my story. It's Jim
I-
Elliott's story.
I don't remember her name.
You don't need to know
What?
her name.
Elizabeth? No, it was Elizabeth. His wife, Elizabeth, who I was just told, even though I've forgotten her name, my sister had not. She's smarter than I am. She's prettier too. No beard. She's a single, also, for all you eligible bachelors out there. Just throwing things out. Here we go. Olive Twitch. There we go. Anyway, Elizabeth showed up, and when she found out, she goes, well, I mean, God called us to speak. God called him to speak to those people. Well, I better go. So her and the wife of the other person, who, you know, doesn't get as much credit as Jim Elliott does for whatever reason, goes and they go. And they do presents and they do little things and then they do presents, they do little things, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, let's give it a shot. And for whatever reason, they don't stab the women. They don't spear them to death before they hit the sand. And over time, not a ton of time either, that entire tribe got to the point from going from spearing anyone who gets close to the beach to getting saved and then speaking to other tribes who were terrified of them. And so that situation, you know, those are those guys that are crazy. Don't talk to them. They're crazy. Hey, I got something to tell you. What? Huh? Like, you know, it's kind of like when those real rough people get saved and you're like, I don't talk to you. You know, they go and speak to people other people can't. And so then, you know, the gospel got spread in a way that no one would have foreseen. And everyone, you know, you had the naysayers. You know, oh, you can't reach that tribe. You can't reach that tribe. Jim Elliott died and they went, see? And then, oh, wow, that doesn't work. That's not appropriate. God says, watch what I can do. So, and then did it. You know, the next people that went got their attention easier and they didn't get killed and they changed the entire, you know, who knows how many people past that have been affected, not just that tribe.
And one of the details that has always stuck out to me is that when she went and she finally got to talk to them, there was the issue that came up of, yes, my husband knew that you would most likely kill him, but he felt that you needed the gospel, and that was more important than his life. Right? And that was the detail. You know, that was one of the major details that broke down those walls. It was one of the major details that broke down those walls and allowed the gospel to move. So, the question then there is, when God put it on the heart of Jim Elliott and his team to reach out to that tribe, was that always the plan?
I mean, the plan is a complicated situation because, you know, when we start dealing with the plan, we got to deal with some hardcore semantics that the English language does not apply for with the word plan or predestination. You know, English is lacking some words. It's kind of like love. And so because of that, the plan is something that's always irritated me. And this is one of those things that me and you do not 100% agree on. But I do not feel it was the initial plan. When God created everything, the plan is fuzzy. Because it's one of those things where, in my belief, I know we're different, so you'll have to talk about yours. But in my belief, I believe that God had foreknowledge of everything. And when he did the creating, he knew where it was going to go. And so, yes, he did at certain points plan certain things. Meaning, you know, he knew we were going to sin. So he made a plan of his son. He knew and so he made a plan of, but I don't think the plan was necessarily something that was carved from the beginning of time and is not, didn't take into effect free will. I still do believe in free will. I believe the plan, a phrase that was used as I was younger is God planned for your stupidity. And that's my personal belief on it. So was it part of the plan? Technically, because everything is part of the plan, because he knew what we were going to do. So he was like, all right, these people need to get saved. Jim, you're going to have to go talk to these people. Well, God, am I going to live? You really need to go talk to these people. But is there any, really should go talk to these people? And he didn't get to.
I distinctly remember it wasn't a question of, am I going to live? The conversation, the intentions as recorded that I remember is that he felt called to these people, and Jim's response was, all right, it's time for me to die. Let's do this.
Yeah. Yeah. He knew 99.9%, unless there is a miracle, I am dead. But it's kind of like Jesus in the garden. Jesus knew what he was about to have to do. But even he said, do you got another plan? And it's like, no, you're still the plan. Are we sure I'm the plan? Yes, you're the plan. All right, I'm the plan. So, there's always that little bit in the back of your head where you're like, but you got something else, right? It's Abraham. Abraham and Isaac. God will prepare a sheep. In the back of his mind, he's going, I hope so, or you is it.
But like we talked about in the last podcast, sometimes you end up as Paul, or John, or James, or Timothy, or Bartholomew.
You have to march that's what it is.
Yeah.
We live in a time.
You don't always have a miraculous, encounter where you get physically saved.
Well,
it doesn't always happen.
Modern times. Something that happened when I was in high school. Columbine. They purposely asked, hey, who in here believes in Jesus? I do. Bang. Like, not even a who here is a Christian and follows. No, just who here. And some people said yes, and there were a lot of Christians who kept their heads down because they were afraid. And did that change anything? I don't know. We don't know who that story affected for the positive over time. We don't know how many of those kids went, wow, she was serious. They were serious because there were several of them. But there's been songs written about them, books, movies.
We know that Rachel Scott was planning on going on a missions trip, and that became a rallying cry for a whole segment of a generation to, pick up that mantle and go on missions. And while sometimes short-term missions isn't exactly stellar,
depending on how it's done,
right, there are missions organizations that connect with local churches and hand off the work when the teenagers leave, and so there was a lot of eternal difference that was made. So here at the end, it's 7:30. An hour somehow when we're remote like this, an hour goes much quicker than
because you forced me to start
when we were
speaking
face to face.
What?
So here at the end, one thing that Pastor Craig said in that snip that I gave him, and if you were listening to it and not watching it, you didn't get the full effect, but he has a giant painting of a sky, and on one side is the sun setting, on the other side is these really dark clouds, and he walks up to it with a smaller picture frame, and he holds the frame up to the painting, and he holds it over top of the dark clouds, and he says, "This is a bad day," and then he moves it over to the light area, and he goes, "But God is still good."
Yeah.
And I like this idea of it's all how you frame it. You can focus on the loss and the despair and the sorrow and the frustration and all of those details, or you can reframe it and hold on to Romans 8:28. That God works together all things for the good of those that love him and are called according to his purpose. And then the only question you have to ask yourself is, do you love God? And are you walking called in his purpose? Right? If you're being selfish and walking in your own purpose, you might have issue. If you don't love God, you might have issue. If you love God and you're walking in your calling according to his purpose, then you can rest in the knowledge that in the grand scheme of eternity, which is the whole point of what Paul writes over and over and over again, is that this life is not all about this life.
Yep.
That this life is all about preparing ourselves for eternity. So I just want to encourage people that frame your situation. Choose your frame. And frame it in a way that gives glory to God, and choose peace.
Yep.
All right. Well, the new podcast came out about half an hour ago. It is the first part of a two-parter.
Ooh.
It's called Sabbath.
Okay.
And it's going to bore the living crap out of you because it is the history and the letter of the law of the Sabbath. And then part two is when we actually get into the spirit of the law of the Sabbath and the payoff for the two-parter. But the first part is the history and the letter of the law. So go listen to that. You may read some stuff there that you read or hear stuff there that you didn't know about the Sabbath before. And that'll be good for you. And I just had something else I wanted to say, and I don't remember what it was. Oh, so my original plan was that this Sabbath episode was going to come out last week. Remember I had mentioned that?
Yep.
The Holy Spirit was like, no, you need to talk about this other thing.
Yeah.
Which is then Divine Frustration came out. And so then you were like, yeah, and then I listened to a different message by Pastor Craig, and I was like, oh, yeah, okay, this is definitely the right thing. And anyway, so it's good to have confirmation like that. So, thanks, man. That's cool. All right. All right, so we've got this 30-second buffer that we have to fill before we hit the stop button, and so...
we in that now?
Yeah, we're in that now.
Okay, so I can pull this out now?
No, put that away.
What? Oh, okay. Why?
Because we're still talking.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Put it away!
It's not even on. I'd have to open it up, and it'll open on the main screen, and so everybody would see it.
You're like, oh, we've transitioned to the gaming part of the night.
No. Which I still haven't fully finished setting up since we started doing this. I've got to figure out how to split them. Because I went to stream something and was like, oh yeah, I haven't figured that out.
Yeah.
I don't want to work on it right now. I want to play games. So I just played games. As opposed to streaming. So, yeah.
I had downloaded the Twitch app onto my phone because I was like, I play phone games from. I mean, pretty often I play phone games. I'm playing that Bleach game right now, and you can't live stream on the Twitch app.
Yeah.
You can only. I mean, you can video live stream like from your camera on your phone.
Yep.
You can't like live stream to the Twitch app. You can't even upload video to the Twitch app. I was very disappointed with the Twitch app. Very disappointed.
It's actually more of a phone limitation than a Twitch app limitation. Certain phones, you people, don't allow for control of the screen in any way.
I can stream to other apps. I can stream my screen to other apps.
There's
whole
a
list
difference
of other
between
apps.
streaming and control. Twitch has overlays and stuff that actually take control of the screen to a certain degree. And a couple other things like that. And that's much harder to do in iOS.
Okay.
Because Apple is so restrictive with all of their everything.
I think we filled that 30-second buffer up enough. You could probably
We
hit that.
have. I will hit the button now. Goodbye.